The morning still carried the humidity of dawn when the boy stood up. His bare feet, already marked by calluses and old scars, found the floor cold and wet with dust and broken promises. The smell of the earth mixed with the oil of the cars, the clatter of pots and pans and the street vendors. Everything seemed to speed around him, except for his small and firm body in front of the wall where his mother rested. The city woke up in a hurry, horns, hurried steps, screams that didn't call him. But he didn't run. He sang, with his belly growling like an empty drum and his eyes fixed on a point between the sky and the cracked wall. He let his voice out, not out of vanity, not by dream, but out of raw necessity, for bread, for medicine, for a moment of dignity. The mother, leaning against the wall, coughs up blood in silence, as if each drop carried the years in which he silenced her pain. His face, pale and sunken, hid the woman who one day danced with the boy in her arms, to the sound of broken radios on bright afternoons. In his memory, there was still the sound of laughter that mixed with rice frying in an old pot. Now, everything was muffled noise, but when he sang, she heard him. He listened as if holding a thread of life between his fingers, as someone who finds consolation in the last melody before the end. Even with weak lungs, the smile came, small but whole, as if each note issued by the sun washed away some of the pain that the body hid. Cars swerved. People quickened their pace. Some threw coins not out of compassion, but to get rid of guilt. Others didn't even look. For most, he was just one more noise among many, a poetic nuisance, a small body that shouldn't be there. But I was there because I had no choice. He was because, in that corner of the sidewalk, his voice was all he had left, a thin but firm voice, a voice that tried not to tremble when hunger hit, a voice that refused to disappear, even when no one seemed to want to hear it. The boy did not know how to sing with technique. She sang urgently. Each syllable seemed to be born of the pains he never said, of the questions he never asked. When the music came out, it was as if he was calling someone who never came. Maybe the father, maybe a kind stranger, perhaps a miracle. But no one answered. Only his mother, with teary eyes and a tired smile, seemed to understand. And there, in that scenario of abandonment and old rain, a child sang to survive, and unknowingly began to open way to the most painful and unexpected truth of his life. The boy sang as if breathing, even when the air seemed scarce. But there were streets where the sound of his voice was not welcome. Every time he opened his mouth to let the melody escape, the windows closed, one by one, like locked doors to the heart of those who had already suffered too much. There was in the eyes of the neighbors a kind of contempt that needed no words. It was a look that says, "You shouldn't be here." It was a kind of silence that screams. They called him the son of a cursed woman, as if his mother's suffering were an inheritance that he carried in his blood. They did not know what she had lost, what she had endured in silence, what had been denied her. They judged as someone who had never had his soul stripped naked by abandonment. And so, the boy grew up wrapped in rejection that disguised itself as indifference. He grew up believing that his voice was not worth it, that his name was a mistake, that his face only caused discomfort. But every time he returned home, something sacred awaited him. The mother, even though she was sick, even with weakened lungs, smiled. He smiled as if his song were a prayer that cleared the air. She didn't applaud him with applause. She applauded with her eyes. Each time the boy sang, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if she could go back in time and hold him in her arms, still small, still whole, still protected. In that small and worn space, love resisted like a lit candle in a windstorm. There was an invisible covenant there. He sang for her to live another day. She smiled to make him believe a little more. While the world protected itself in their presence with gates and stones, the two healed each other in sharing a sound that only they knew how to hear. A sound that was not just voice. It was memory, promise, sustenance. It was a sound of the bond between those who stayed and those who were left. And, even without knowing it, he began to understand that pain, when heard with truth, has the power to transform silence into seed. He heard that there was a contest on television, a stage where the voices did not need to have a surname, where the eyes of the audience closed the ears of prejudice. For the boy, that advertisement taped to the pole was more than paper. It was an invitation to escape the dust, the pain, and the oblivion. It was a chance to transform the voice into medicine, into a roof, into food. He spent the day repeating the song in silence, looking up at the sky as if rehearsing before his ancestor. With his heart full of a hope he could not name, he went there. But hope without the right clothing is easily dismissed. At the studio door, holding his cardboard sign with trembling hands, He waited. He waited with simple faith, with shabby clothes, with hunger hidden under his skin. The poster had been made with the last box where rice used to come. In it, he drew stars around his own name, as if trying to remember that it still shines, even in silence. When it was his turn, the security guards didn't even let him pass. They laughed softly, then loudly. One of them pointed out the punctured slipper. Another asked if he was lost. He tried to sing right there, holding the sign on his chest as a shield. But he was silenced with a dry, almost violent gesture, as if his voice had no place in that world of lights and polished promises. That night, he did not return home. He lay on the hard floor in front of the studio, as if the concrete could hear him, hugging the poster. He slept without sleep. Each crooked letter written there felt like a request. Let me try. The dawn wind covered him like an invisible cloak, and there, among lampposts and remnants of ballot papers, he found silence. But he did not give up. In the short and tired dream he had, he saw his mother smiling in the audience, and behind her, a sky full of drums beating in a slow rhythm as his heart beat. His hope did not go out of tune for lack of talent. She broke an imposed silence, in the swift judgment, in the scornful laughter. But even there, between the sound of the asphalt and the hurried breathing of passers-by, he still believed, because when someone sings with truth, not even failure can completely silence them. The melody may be wounded, but it remains echoing, and in that echo life insisted. Even when everything seemed to want to be silent, the sun had not yet risen when the boy resumed his way home, the crumpled cardboard poster under his arm, his eyes downcast, his voice collected like a wounded bird. He walked through narrow alleys, those at times forgotten, where one only walks when there is no other place. It was there, in the 7th alley, that he stopped, not because he wanted to, but because he felt it. There was a melody in the air, not of music, but of presence, a different silence, heavy as nostalgia. Sitting on a crooked chair, leaning against cracked wooden gate, a blind old man seemed to hear things that no one else heard. His white eyes looked nowhere, but his ears seemed to track stories in the air. Her hands, worn out by time, held a rosary made of seed beads and braided straw, perhaps a legacy of a forgotten terreiro. When the boy passed, still with timid steps, the old man spoke, not loudly but firmly. That voice carries an emptiness that I know. The boy stopped. His heart raced. He did not answer. The old man smiled, as if listening to the memory. A long time ago I heard a similar pain, and it came from a son who didn't come back. He asked the boy to sing, right there, without a stage, without an audience, and he sang, not with technique, not with hope. She sang as someone who needs to get rid of the weight in her chest. The voice came out shaky, dirty with sleep and discouragement, but sincere. When he finished, the old man nodded slowly. I recognized the pain before the melody. This voice is not for sidewalk. It's for those who need to remember what they lost. Then he entered the house without asking permission from the weather. He returned in an old suit, wrapped in straw cloth and the smell of old incense. It was my son's. He left young. Take it. Go sing where you need to be heard. I will pay for your registration, but take it with honor, seen as someone who carries a name. The boy didn't know what to say. His words were too tired. He just held the suit as if it were sacred. The trembling hands passed slowly through the worn fabric, as if touching an altar, and there, in front of that man whom he could not see with his eyes, he felt for the first time something he could not name. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was a memory. Perhaps it was a certainty that even in the alleys where no one enters, there are still voices that listen to what the world refuses to hear. Before leaving, the old man placed in the boy's hands a small copper coin, worn out by time. Keep it. Every song needs roots. And it was with this new garment, this new faith, and this new silence that he followed, no longer alone. The stage was too big for his small feet. The lights looked like the sun that hurts instead of warming up. There were people everywhere, cameras that didn't blink, eyes waiting for something he didn't know if he could give. But he didn't tremble, or trembled inside where no one could see. He wore the old man's suit, slightly loose, but dignified. She carried in her chest the silence of her mother, and in her hands the weight of what she still wanted to save. When they called him by name, he just breathed. I don't sink, just enough not to fall. He climbed the 3 steps as if climbing to a destination. In the center of the stage, the light enveloped him like a forgotten promise. He looked at the camera, not to seek fame. He looked as if begging someone, somewhere, to listen. His voice came out low at first, but firm. Each verse seemed to be torn from the skin, and when the song demanded more, he gave it. He was crying his eyes, but without going out of tune. He found his soul exposed, as if to say, "If it is the last time, let it be whole." The audience fell silent. Even the air seemed to respect it. There were no instruments. There were no arrangement. There was a boy, a pain, and a voice. With each note, he seemed to bring up memories he never lived, goodbyes that still hurt, promises that no one kept. She sang as if writing a letter to the stranger, as someone who says goodbye and at the same time asks for a miracle. And strangely, there was beauty in it, a beauty that cannot be taught nor manufactured. You just sit down. When the last word fell to ground, there was no immediate applause. There was silence, a dense, reverent silence, as if everyone there had been touched by something they didn't know how to name. The boy didn't smile. He just lowered his eyes. He knew that his mother was watching him, even if through a glass and devices. I knew she was listening, with her heart, and for her, for that woman who never silenced him. He had sung as if it were the last time, because sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't this, as if it were, that life changes. On the jury bench, 3 men and a woman were waiting. They wore fine clothes and experienced countenance. They analyzed, discussed, smiled with a certain distance. They were there to judge voices, but they did not know that afternoon they would judge more than tone. When the boy finished, the second judge let the microphone slip through his fingers, not out of fright, by memory. The announced name echoed like gentle thunder within his chest. But it wasn't the name that paralyzed him. It was the detail. That thin bracelet on the boy's wrist, faded blue, with a gold thread in the middle. The same one he had put years ago in the arm of a newborn before leaving without returning. At that moment, everything around seemed to fall silent. The lights lost power. The murmur of the audience became a vacuum. The man, until then so safe, breathed in fragments. The memories, kept as a wound covered by layers of reason, returned with delicate violence. He remembered the hospital, the muffled cry of his wife, the choice he made, a choice that no one forced him to make, but that he never had the courage to face. He walked out the door without looking back. And now, there in front of him, was a son he had never seen grow up. He didn't say anything. I couldn't. Guilt has its own way of silencing even the most eloquent. While the other judges praised, discussed emotion and technique, he just stared. His face was motionless, but his eyes, red, said it all. Deep down, he knew that voice came from him too, not in the timbre, but in the absence. The boy was the son of what was missing, and at the same time of what resisted. When it came time to vote, the others gave yes with enthusiasm. The microphone was passed to him. His hand hesitated. His voice cracked. And then he didn't speak. He just raised his thumb slowly, as if raising a mute prayer, as someone who begs for forgiveness without knowing if he will be heard. And his eyes, teary, followed the boy as if they wanted to follow him to the stage, to the beginning, to the moment when everything could have been different. In the audience, no one understood the silence of the jury. But the boy noticed. He felt something different in that look. It wasn't just admiration. It was a kind of lament, a recognition that needed no words. And there, for the first time, someone heard him beyond the music. Someone saw not only his voice, but his origin, his emptiness, his hope. And in that suspended instant, the stories began to intertwine like ancient roots returning to the earth from which they should never have been uprooted. The news spread to the narrow streets of the village like the smell of hot food on a day of scarcity. The boy on the sidewalk was a finalist, not the one with the edited videos, the expensive costumes, the compound names, but the one with the raw voice, the crumpled poster, the silent mother. Some were silent, others feigned surprise. But the mother didn't pretend anything. From the hospital bed, with tubes invading her body and machines marking time, she just smiled. On the small television attached to the wall, the images were not clear, but her eyes knew every feature of that face. She saw him enter the stage again. And when he opened his mouth to sing, he didn't just hear the voice, he felt his childhood. He felt the days of struggle. He felt everything he didn't say. She couldn't clap her hand. I couldn't lift my body. But their eyes shone as if they wanted to get up and dance with him, as if they still had the strength to hug him at the end of the performance. The boy knew she was watching. He sang for her, through her. Each note was a gesture of gratitude, a declaration of love, a supplication to time. His voice was no longer alone. She carried the weight of those who listened to her when no one else did. And in that deep corner, where the melody met the memories, he let all the scars sing with him. He did not hide them. They were there, exposed, and they were the ones who made their voices reach places that the technique would never touch. At the end of the performance, the camera cut to the audience. Applause, tears, and, among the judges, a face still struggling to breathe lightly. But the boy didn't look there. He looked up, beyond the lights, beyond the cameras, as if somehow she wanted to reach the room where her mother smiled silently, as if to say with his eyes, "I'm here because you never told me to shut up." And she, even though she was connected to wires and bordering on the edge of life, answered with a look that said, "And I'm still here because you taught me to listen again." The hospital smelled of silence and contained mourning. The walls seemed to listen more than they said. The mother breathed hard, but her eyes still searched for her son whenever the door creaked. She knew time was short. Every second flowed like sand between her fingers, and she, used to resisting, now just waited, not out of pity, but out of a last moment of peace. On the other side of town, the boy waited for news, clutching the old man's coin in his hands as if it could protect him from the news he feared. But that afternoon, it was someone else who came, the judge, not with a toga, nor with a firm expression. He came with simple flowers in his hands and a weight on his shoulders that made him walk slower. The hospital corridor seemed longer than any courtroom. As he crossed the door, the world seemed to fail him. He saw that woman, exhausted but alive, and felt an old guilt get up from her chair and look him in the eyes. He approached the bed with shy steps. The flowers trembled in their hand. He knelt down, not because of formality, but because his body no longer knew how to stand up in front of the truth, in the face of the life he abandoned. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He did not defend his mistakes with arguments. He just cried, not loud, but as someone who no longer knows how to hold what he carries inside. He cried for the childhood he did not know, for the fevers he didn't take care of, for the birthdays he forgot. The mother, with dull eyes, recognized it, not the face, perhaps, but the gesture. And there, in that room where the devices marked the last bars of life, she did not judge. She stretched out her fingers with difficulty, touching his hand, as if sealing an ancient truth and accepting what time is left. There were no words, just a brief touch. But in that touch there was forgiveness, there was goodbye, there was that which books never teach. In the hallway, the boy observed everything through the crack of the half-open door. He wanted to come in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why. But the feet did not obey. He stood there, with his chest full of questions and his heart torn between sorrow and mercy. I watched the man kneeling, the serene mother and the silence between them. He didn't know if he should call him Dad. He didn't know if what he saw was redemption or just belated repentance. But at that moment, she understood something that is not written. Sometimes, cry is the only possible language between two worlds that are broken. The sky that day was heavy, as if carrying in clouds what the boy could no longer contain. The path to the cemetery was made in silence, with firm steps, but without haste. People followed the ceremony with the respect reserved for those who left with dignity, even though they lived with so little. The boy wore the old suit more firmly. Now it fit him like a new skin. In his hand, the same poster that had accompanied him on the streets. He cleaned the edges, straightened the folds, and in fine letters wrote a sentence. "Today I sing for her to hear from heaven." The earth around the tomb was red and damp, as if it were also in mourning. The coffin descended slowly, and the sound with touching the bottom of the ground sounded like the end point of an unfinished song. The boy stood motionless before the tomb, his eyes fixed on the void. He didn't cry like he used to. It was a different cry now, more mature, quieter, more whole. Behind him, in the distance, the judge, not dressed as a father, nor as a judge, but as a broken man. He also cried, with his head down, as if he had lost a chance to be someone for whom he needed it most. Then the boy sang. No music, no follow-up, only voice. A voice that came from the guts, not from the chest. That came from abandonment, not from study. That came from the pain that already knew all the words and decided to sing without any. He sang looking at the sky, as if waiting for the wind to carry the song to where her presence can still reach him. Each note seemed to go through the throat like a knife, but it came out with the softness of things that come from the soul. It was a farewell, but it was also a beginning. The crowd listened in reverence. No one dared to interrupt. Music crossed the space and sold what life tore apart. And when the chant was over, He walked up to the judge. I didn't say father. He said nothing. He just held out the poster, as if offering a memory and a lesson at the same time. On the back, written in small print, the phrase that hurt more than any scream: "My voice was born from the absence of your name." The man held the paper as if it were too fragile to touch. He did not answer. He just cried in silence. The boy then walked away with slow steps, as if carrying childhood on his shoulders. He stopped for a moment in front of the grave, took the coin given by the blind old man, and buried it next to the grave. A simple gesture. But there, on that ground where all was lost, he planted a symbol, the root of what was now his. Not to forget, but to remember that faith, when planted, flourishes in silence. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more stories that heal, restore, and rescue what time has tried to erase. Leave your like, write in the comments what this journey has awakened in your heart, and share it with someone who needs to remember that even forgotten voices can be heard. Because when the soul sings, it does not sing alone. It calls others back to life.